Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning and welcome to this morning's Signpost Series webinar, which is brought to you in association with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, Food Drink Ireland, SkillNet and National Rural Network. I'm Tom O'Dwyer and I'm your host for this morning's webinar. This morning I'm joined by my Teagasc colleague, Dr. Keena, Countryside Management Specialist in Teagasc. And Catherine joins us to talk about hedge planting and management, and also the launch of Hedgerow Week 2023, which starts today, the 1st of September, and runs over the next week until Friday, the 8th of September. To help with questions this morning, I'm joined by a second Teagasc colleague, Burgess. Eddie is the Water Quality Specialist with the Agricultural Catchments Programme in Teagasc. And as I said, he will be helping me with your questions later on this morning. Good morning to you both, Catherine and Eddie.
Morning, Tom.
Morning, Tom. Morning, everyone.
You're welcome. Before we start, Catherine, I've just a couple of questions for yourself. Today is a significant day, the 1st of September, for two reasons. As I've said in my opening comments, it's the start of Hedgerow Week, and it's also an important date in the hedgerow management calendar. But firstly, Hedgerow Week. Tell me a little bit about that, Catherine.
Well, it's the 5th year, Tom, of Hedgerow Week. It was a Teagasc initiative back in 2019, and we went virtual during COVID and came out the other side and do a bit of everything now. And this is very different this year because we are fortunate to be joined by the Heritage Council. So it's a joint initiative this year. So as a result of that, we were very fortunate during the week to have two ministers to launch the week. So we had Minister Pippa Hackett and Minister Malcolm Noonan on a farm in County Dublin with lovely Hedge. And they are going to launch it through a video clip now.
I'm here to launch Hedgerow Week 2023. It's a joint initiative between Teagasc and the Heritage Council, and it's all about celebrating and promoting hedgerows across the country. As a farmer myself, I'm a beef and sheep farmer. I understand the importance of hedgerows, not just as a barrier for around fields and as a shelter for the livestock, also for the supports they provide for wildlife. They provide shelter, they provide food, they provide corridors for animals big and small to travel around from one field to another. So they really are vital in our support of biodiversity. Today's launch is all about Hedgerow Week. There's a number of events up and down the country. I really would encourage people to seek them out, find out what's on near you and go and attend and learn something maybe new this year about hedgerows you didn't know about. I'd also strongly encourage farmers and contractors to, coming into this new hedge cutting season, to think about wildlife, think about what hedgerows can do to support biodiversity and, to be sympathetic to that cause.
So we're here to launch Hedgerow Week 2023, a really important week in celebration of our hedgerows, which are unique here in Ireland and something very, very special right across the island of Ireland. Our hedgerows are hugely significant. They're important corridors for wildlife, they're important for foraging, for food, not for just for other creatures but for us as well. And it's beautiful to be here in this lovely farm here today to look at these hedgerows rich with blackberries and lots of other fruits as well. Hedgerow Week is a joint initiative of Teagasc and the Heritage Council. It's really important, hugely significant in terms of our culture and in terms of our biodiversity. I would encourage farmers, would encourage wider community to get out and look at the events in their area, get out and celebrate our hedgerows throughout Hedgerow Week 2023.
Certainly looking at the hedgerows featured in that video, Catherine, some great examples of hedgerows it looked like to me, and I'm sure maybe you'll be coming back to mention maybe some of the features of those hedgerows during your presentation. But just also before we go to your presentation, I also mentioned that the 1st of September is a significant date in the hedgerow management calendar. Maybe just, why the importance of the 1st of September as a date calendar in the calendar, Catherine?
It is the start of the hedge cutting season that you can cut hedges. So it's 6 months when we couldn't cut, and the reason for that was because of birds nesting. Now there still can be fruit and food on the hedges, so some people will delay it. Just because it's the first doesn't mean we have to cut, but we are allowed now to cut and manage. We'll touch on that through the presentation.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, it just reminds me, in the video there was very evident fruit on the hedgerows on the farm where the launch event took place, and just looking around the countryside at the moment, to me it's quite striking, the reddy colour beginning to emerge on the whitethorn or hawthorn hedges. It's quite striking, I think, this autumn, or maybe it's that way every autumn.
I think we had a fantastic, if you remember back, hadn't we a fantastic white countryside, and the weather, I think, just suited it. We actually saw both the whitethorn and the blackthorn, so we're now reaping the rewards of that, I think.
Absolutely, actually, yeah. Okay, so we could probably talk more, Catherine, but we've invited you on this morning to make a presentation. So over to you now, Catherine. I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Tom. So again, just to reiterate about Hedgerow Week and some of the events, I'm going to briefly go through what's on, and I'm grouping them into 3 different lots. So there's the farm walks on the Teagasc farms for farmers, but also very much for the local communities, for any non-farming people, because we've had great discussions when we get together. So going right around the country, from Kildalton and Kilkenny up to Grange and Meath, Ballyhaise in Cavan, Athenryan in Galway, and then back down to Cork on Thursday and Friday next week, Clonakilty and Moore Park. So this, we're in every region anyway. All farm walks start at 11 and, an hour and a half or whatever to go through that. And then in this year, this is the new initiative with the Heritage Council and the Heritage officers and biodiversity officers in the county councils have come on board with and they've just completed their Heritage Week, so they're extremely busy, but they're still and some of these events have to be booked and some of them are booked out, so I won't go through them in detail. They're on the website to go there, but the walks and talks by Kildare County Council, a lovely podcast with Offaly County Council, again back to Kildare for What's in a Hedge with Éanna Ilana and Mary O'Connor, Hedge Laying and Wildlife, Nor Vision have a few events, Hedges of Kilkenny City, again Nor Vision on Wednesday, and Harvesting Our Hedges in Monaghan, Carrickmacross Library, and again a few more there in Kildare, What's in a Hedge again in Selbridge Library, a Mass Path Walk, which is lovely to see the fruits of the hedges in Dunmore Church Car Park in Kilkenny, and again back to Monaghan in Clonus for in the library. So lots of a number of events there. Just to go to the website, I think Yvonne has put the link into the chat. So it's hedgerowweek.ie and you'll see everything. Okay. Today's talk began out of hedge workshops we held this summer with kind of key stakeholders, which I wanted to kind of help get my head around what we're saying, because I've been talking about this for many, many years, as I often say, and I don't, okay, they're more important now, but I think we have a lot to do. I haven't been successful, and I need others to help me to get the message over and get the right message over for our hedges. So we had workshops in Kildalton, Teagasc Ballyhaise, and in Caffrey in Greenmount, County Antrim. We went to Brian Irvine and Nicola up there and saw some fantastic hedges. So the reason it just took off during the summer, it was something we'd intended to do, and myself and Ruth Wilson from the All Ireland Pollinator Plan often talked about, especially going to the north to see Brian's work there. So but this actually arose out of a webinar, and I'm going to be touching on some of their work again. You may remember, actually it wasn't 2023, sorry, it was 2022, Francoise and Burrell and Jack Baudry were on the webinar. And if you want to look back on that, some of the things I'm quoting out of them, but because they didn't get over last year, they actually came this summer and joined us for those hedge workshops. So following that, we have an expanded Hedgerow stakeholder group, and all are welcome to join if there are other people interested. We had 2 online meetings in August then, with kind of the thoughts of the people who are very much engaged in hedges with their work, and we circulating all the views. I firmly believe we need a winter site visit, because you cannot look at structure during the summer. Everything looks good in the summer. So this work is very much to be continued. And as I said, all are welcome, but I will be feeding in what we've done so far through my presentation today. So again, there wasn't agreement on everything, far from it. But there was agreement on some things. And I suppose I'm not so sure that I'm even looking for agreement. I'm looking for understanding and discussion and seeing where other people are coming from. But certainly the one thing we all agreed, for people who to give up their work, to give up their time to engage in such a group, we all passionately believe hedges are important, but sometimes for very different reasons. And that's fine. That's the commonality. We all love hedges. One of the reasons there, as I said, there's a number of reasons: biodiversity, food, carbon, water. I could go on and on, landscape, lots of reasons. But biodiversity is the one that gets highlighted a lot. And we just need to remember, when we are talking about what is biodiversity, and it's all the flora we have, all the fauna and all the habitats. So when it comes to hedges, we're talking about all the flora and fauna that live in them. And to remember that 1/4 of all organisms on the planet are found in soil. So we must remember the soil in the hedgerow. And from a biodiversity point of view, we need to maintain all our native species of flora and fauna, which have been here for 10,000 years and are in tune with each other regarding timing of flowering and other growth stages. And Dumont, a paper in 2005, warned of the dangers of aesthetically pleasing or charismatic species being favoured over ugly ones. So when we're people who understand and are interested in biodiversity must think of all, and a single species focus can be dangerous. You can think of lots of examples where what's good for one species isn't good for another, and that's that we just need to keep that in mind when we're talking about hedges. We have 689,000 kilometres of hedges. We're using a very broad definition of hedgerow, from earth and bank with some vegetation to stock-proof hedges, and all in between, such as the picture we're looking at there. So it's a beautiful picture, but some people would say that's not a good hedge, and it isn't worth keeping. But I suppose my point is that we're thinking, when my biodiversity hat is on, I'm seeing lots of things there in the gaps, in the soil, in the invertebrates, in the plants at the base, the mosses, the lichens, the fungi, the invertebrates. So I'm just making the point that a hedge is about more than the hedge species, and it's about more than stock proofing. So all our existing hedges, and actually one of our farmers, Brian Daniels, on one of the calls, his only comment, which I think was powerful, was we should look after the ones we have, because I think we were talking about planting and how to plant, but it was a very good point. And again, just explaining why we talk about native when we're talking in biodiversity, that again, the species that have been here for 10,000 years are in tune with each other. And, the examples we know of the willow and the oak being so good because of all the invertebrates associated with them. And I suppose the other extreme to that is when you look at the ornamentals, which have a place in the world, in the garden, absolutely. But ornamentals are not as good for biodiversity. They're bred for their looks, not for their biodiversity. And in general, they can be bred to withstand attack from other invertebrates. So I think ornamentals don't belong on the farm, certainly. And I think we who are fortunate enough to live in houses in the countryside need to be careful too about garden escapees, because they can be a problem. So then when we are planting, we're talking about, from a biodiversity point of view, Irish provenance means plants grown from seed collected from Irish plants that have been growing in Ireland for the past 10,000 years. So, when plants are grown from Irish seed, they are collected carefully from hedges. The origin of plants or seeds determines their adaptability, quality, and wildlife value. So again, just explaining, the trees of the same species adapted to different regions of Europe can bud, burst, flower and seed at different times. So a white thorn coming from Eastern Europe is not the same as a white thorn coming from Ireland. Even though it's the same species, it's not the same provenance. And Irish birds, mammals and insects have co-adapted with local Irish tree species. And then there is a word, and we're going to be talking about the acres planting in a while, Irish origin. So Irish tree seed sent abroad and seedlings re-imported may be called Irish origin, but they may be carrying pests and disease. So it's not as preferential as Irish provenance. Okay, so again, I think it was a comment, one of the comments that Jack Baudry came back to me with about we were arguing so much about what we should do. He had the comment about it's important to say what we shouldn't do as well, even though we always, I know in Teagasc would be always trying to show net positively, but I think it is important. And now we're talking about healthy hedges, because I think, again, in the group, there's nobody that they and there was about 100 people on that circulation list who came and went in the discussions, and there's nobody there would say we want unhealthy hedges. You wouldn't say that. So therefore, healthy hedges, we're very worried about our hedges not being healthy, which is not maybe clear to everybody, because again, as I said, everything looks good this time of year, but we are concerned about the health of a lot of our hedges. So 3 things, I suppose, would be my mission in life, more so than telling you how to do something, would be telling you, to make it clear that it's not good to reduce the height of tree line hedges, which create mushroom or upside down toilet brush hedges, like the hedge on the left there, topped above the wire, and it's not achieving anything. Number 2 is not to overflail topped hedges, reducing the amount of vegetation, particularly on top of banks, as on the picture on the right. And I don't have a picture for the last one, but not to push over hedges with a digger as an improper method of hedge laying. Those 3 would be my no-nos, I suppose, apart from removing them, which we won't that's a given. So they would be the 3 points. So again, just to touch on the hedge laying, this is what we want. If we're talking about hedge laying, and there's a lot of farmers hedge laying in the under acres, this is what we want. Pure skill, these hedges survive then for, hundreds of years after this kind of treatment. They can tolerate clean cuts, properly, no water left on them. But bad hedge laying is bad. Okay, the second thing then, I suppose that maybe I won't say we didn't all agree on, but when you think about it from a biodiversity point of view, it is very, very true that diversity is desirable. And I think if there was one thing that Francoise and Jack left us with after the 3 hedgerow workshops, when they summarised, because their hedges are very different and all that, and they study the landscape very much more, I think, than we do here. And diversity is the words that kept coming out. And in fact, they sent me on about 50 peer-reviewed papers, which I can make available to anybody, especially anybody doing research on hedges. And I did look through them all for this presentation. And again, just some of the comments that I pulled out from all their years of work with colleagues. So just again, within a landscape, the diversity of hedgerows, land use and farming systems contribute to the diversity of species. No single hedgerow can harbour all the local species pool of a given group, for example, plants, birds or insects. The use of a single criterion to define important hedges will be detrimental in the long run, as hedges with secondary functions may be removed, though these functions may appear important later or in a different context. And another point they came up with was, and it is true here in Ireland as well, that not all bird species react in a similar way to vegetation, dimensions and density. So again, summary is diversity is what we want, diversity of healthy hedges. So we've got that far. Now, just because we've mentioned the word removal, I thought it was an opportune time to make one point it's really important for advisors and farmers to know that the rules regarding landscape features have changed in 2023. So if a farmer removes a hedge, previously, if they replaced it with the same length, now it's twice the length, which I think indicates the value of the older hedge is never going to be, you can't replace a new hedge with an old hedge. It's not equal value, so twice the length is there now. And again, I haven't covered it here now because but not to forget the EIA as well. If a farmer is removing a hedge more than 500 metres or creating a field more than 5 hectares, which is more likely to happen than the 500 metres, you actually must look for permission. But that change is what I want to highlight there, to give practical information to people. Okay, so we've covered healthy, we've covered diversity, and now we're coming to bigger is better, because that's another slogan that was strongly suggested. I like it. I was in context, I like it. Density is also very important. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But what we mean by bigger is higher, wider and denser. And we'll hear a lot more about this from Lillian O'Sullivan next week when she's talking about the carbon side of hedges. So the word this was the kind of what I started off with first to try and get the message about the height up. There was again research showing that birds don't nest in vegetation that's less than 1.5 meters because they know the birds of prey will come along on top, or the foxes will come along at the bottom. So they don't nest near the top or bottom of the hedge. They're always at eye level, if you ever notice during the winter, if you're out walking and you see the remains of the hedges. So that's purely for a general rule for birds nesting. But obviously we want bigger. We've always said to leave the height as high as possible, leave the peak as high as possible. But for the topped hedges, we do want it topped, which we will come to in a moment. So bigger is better is good in context. So for the topped hedge, there's a fine tall hedge with retaining occasional trees, but you can see where when it is cut, the rest of the hedge is cut. Otherwise, they will turn into trees. It will apical dominance. I think I have a better slide on that. Frequency of cutting, and we heard with this picture is from Caffrey, beautiful hedge where they're doing a lot of work on 1, 2 and 3 year cycles. Lovely flowers there. Beautiful hedge, suits that kind of one. Now he did say it would be a little bit ragged after the 3 years. So I suppose the frequency of cutting is a very hot topic as well, and there isn't agreement on it. And nobody's wrong, I suppose, once you realise, once you understand where other people are coming from. Obviously, there's more flowers if you don't cut it. You don't get much flowers until a few years. You don't get any after 2 years, maybe some after 3. That hedge was flowering very well, I must say. But some of the older hedges, especially where there's more than whitethorn, I would be concerned. Again, I'm going back to a webinar that you can refer back to there. You'll get the links on this webinar will all be put up on the website, and you'll get the links to these previous ones if you have an interest in this. But this was one where we were talking about native provenance, and in particular the point I'm going to make is about plant health, reducing the risks to the hedges. And Maria Cullen, the Society of Irish Plant Pathologists, was making the point. Again, I'm not going to read through this, but is very concerned about the health of hedges, and in particular to keep them. She is very worried about rough cuts, and we've all seen terrible pictures of rough cuts. So her advice from the health point of view was trim hedges lightly and only when and where necessary. So just that was the point I wanted to bring in here. So obviously it's like your garden hedge. The way to keep the hedge better is to do it little and often. If you have a different aspiration for your hedge, for flowers, that's a different. So it's a case of what do you want from each hedge, and remembering that diversity word. So again, coming back to something that we don't want, and this is the one I think we can have most influence this week now with the new hedges being planted. So when we're talking about the topped hedges, you saw the picture I showed you there. I mean, a bull wouldn't get through it. It's so super that there was no wire fences. This is the other image of the topped hedge that I think more people see when they think about topped hedges, because there is a lot of these around, and it's again the whitethorn, when it's planted, wants to grow into being a tree. Wherever you cut it, it will sprout. In fact, it will pull the growth up to that point, and if it's kept cut at that point, then eventually they die out. So that's a problem. And it is still a problem that people do not understand this when they're planting new hedges, which is my main mission today. So again, the two hedges, you can see there, I used to call this one the escaped hedge because it has escaped been topped. At our discussions, people, and I'd never liked the word escaped, it didn't really explain what it is. So I'm now calling it a tree line hedge. Now, the reason I was worried about it's not a tree line, because a tree line to me is an avenue with individual, big mature trees, which was never a hedge, but this is a hedge. So we call it a tree line hedge. Is very different to our topped hedge. Okay. The tree line hedge, there are other examples of your tree line hedge where the whitethorn has never been topped, or the other tree species in it. It can be ash, it can be big trees, but it can be a line of whitethorns, never been topped equals a tree line hedge, which is what, by nature, that's what the hedge wants to do. And the value of this is there's huge value in the canopy of it, because you can see full of fruit and flowers, and then associated food for birds, etc. So the best practice for this is not to just side trim it where necessary. People talk about unmanaged hedges. I don't think there's such thing as an unmanaged hedge, because if you walk away from the field, the hedge will come into scrub. Now, maybe it's cattle that's grazing it and keeping the hedge in tow, and maybe you don't call that management, but I would. So there's never any harm in side trimming a tree line hedge. But the big danger is if it's topped at the wrong height. Now, if it's laid properly, that's a different story. We saw the picture earlier, but that's not the main way of managing our hedges. So these hedges, people still go in thinking, let's just go back to this picture here. Oftentimes you'll see a farm, especially when it changes hand, and somebody goes in, tidies up the hedge, and they cut it off about 4 or 5 feet up. And that is not good. And we need to be very clear on that. That is not good practice. And people think they're doing the right thing. So this is why I take it on myself. If I have failed to give that message over, it's my problem. Then we go on to our topped hedges. Again, the ones on the top are super. The one on the right is super because it's really dense. The one on the left was probably one that, again, these were all grown 200 years ago. And I would say 40, 50 years ago, when machines came in, the one top of the left was topped there. Because it's been managed sympathetically, it's doing okay. It's not dying on its feet. And it has been improved tremendously by leaving, for the first time about 5 years ago, that whitethorn, which is now, you can see the flowers on it and fruit on it. So every topped hedge, we're demonstrating that at the events this week, how to start to leave a whitethorn. And one every year is the way I would like to do it. Now, in Caffrey, they were doing 10 a year, and they were worried about them breaking off. And true to their word, I see one of our own broken off in a hedge. But at the same time, I like the idea of having one this year on a different height, then at a different, a different stage of growth. But the ones at the bottom are the serious problem. So what we want to do is stop this happening, our newly planted hedges. So the topped hedges then has huge diversity in the base. You can see all the birds and mammals, etc., and the soil and all the things. And it can have, now that's only an occasional tree there, it can still have some of the canopy benefits if it has the occasional tree, in particular a thorn tree. We were great in reps at leaving ash trees because they were good for firewood, but what we particularly want to demonstrate now is leaving a thorn tree first. So the best practice management of the topped hedges is to side trim from a wide base to a triangular profile, cut the growing point to prevent escaping, leave the peak as high as possible, at least 1.5 metres, but as big as possible, as big and high, retain occasional thorn saplings and allow mature into flowering and fruiting trees, cut little and often. Now, my worry is that most of our hedges are actually not that dense at the base. So when Lillian is talking next week about topped hedges, I worry that I think and she'd speak for herself next week, that most of the topped hedges, because that's what we have in the country, are the tree line hedges which have been cut down and they are still stumpy. This is a clearly one not so good, no flowers or fruit in that one, that speaks for itself. So no trees left in it, but that's a very easy one to rectify. As I said, this autumn, if we could get every topped hedge in the country to leave one bunch of thorns, it's not too much to ask. I think the problem is advisors and farmers say to me, I don't have a thorn tree. They don't understand what we're looking for there. So that's why we're demonstrating that this week. Okay, so for hedge planting then, just to go through, because there are 2,000 kilometres being planted. I think that's about 5,000 farmers, if I'm right. A huge amount of plants been needed. There will be an issue there. Acres circular, just to know that the acre spec has changed, that it is no longer a requirement to plant at least 3 species or to have not more than 85% of one, making up the total. However, it is recommended. So obviously, yes, the issue is getting I love mixed species hedges up to the 85%. I think that's a lovely, because you need structure with the thorns. But the problem is getting the Irish provenance, and in particular of the minor species. And for acres, they must be Irish origin or provenance, must be purchased from registered producers. But we won't solve that problem, or that's a case of knowing that. What I really want the message from now until I finish soon is that for those 5,000 farmers, when they ask the advisor, or when they ask, I want, what will I plant? The first question is, which hedge do you want? Because they're being mixed up. And to understand that the whip in the advisor's hand there on the top of the left, its whole mission in life is to grow into being a tree, like the ones in the middle and like the ones at the bottom eventually, after 200 years. They are a line of trees. That's apical dominance. That's what trees do. That's what whitethorn does. But whitethorn also thrives on being pruned, incremental cutting. We heard a lot about it in Caffrey. It's just common sense. It's not about cutting. It's about not cutting back to the same point every year. It works superbly with and this is the demos we have on our 10 Teagasc farms at this stage, where we're doing 10 metres each year, so you can see the progression. So down at the bottom there was the one that has 2 seasons growth and has been cut once and multiplied to 5, cut twice, multiplied to 25. And in February this year, we'll be cutting again. So you can imagine you'll hardly get into the hedge after that. Planting a topped hedge, then, to me, you must build up from a dense base. Choose hedgerow species that tolerate trimming, plant for occasional whitethorn trees, protect each of these with a tree guard. You can see my picture there. I think when we did a huge amount of hedgerow work back in 2006, we didn't get that message over because we didn't keep showing pictures of it to leave the tree day one, because people, once they get into the pruners into their hand, they actually get passionate about prune everything and forget the tree. Now, you can leave the crooked tree, as we're doing in our existing topped hedges, but if you're starting from the start, you may as well start at the bottom, at the beginning. So then you prune it back and push compostable film over the prune stumps and prune each year afterwards. The more, providing you're doing the incremental cutting, the more you prune, the denser it'll be. And there's the picture there. And that's what we'll be showing this week. The compostable film suppliers, the names are there. They'll be on the presentation afterwards. Samco and Maestech in Ireland. So it's about 60-70 cents per metre, depending on the width. I would go the wider, the better, unless you're going to do some walking down with the vegetation. So then the opposite is to plant a new tree line hedge. Do not prune after planting, and then you cannot use the compostable film. It's not possible to do it. You can throw down bark mulch, but not every farmer has it or can get it. We're trying sheep's wool. The sheep farmers have suggested that to us, and I'd say it's going to work superbly, but never to top it. I think this is the worry, is that people, when those new hedges, when they're planted, when they don't do the dense space at the beginning, and when I ask people what's their plans, we'll top it later. And that is creating the upside down Toilish bush hedge, mushroom hedge that we don't want. Okay, so I suppose my message then is we want both types on every farm, and we want all types. Now, I've covered that because I totally believe in every, as I say, broken down hedge, everything. But when you're planting a new hedge, I don't think you're going to plant or plan a broken down hedge or plan to do an earth bank. So you're probably going to want a full hedge, and then this is where it's really important to size. So just in summary then, our overall best practice one, now this is where maybe everyone has different angles. Some people will believe in laying everything in a cycle, and that's fine. Some people will want to leave them all as tree line hedges. Again, that's fine. I suppose I'm trying to move people who have all topped hedges, and this is what the vision I would suggest for our commercial farms, to have some tree line hedges. We must sing the praises of those, and maybe I haven't done that much. And again, I've been pushed by some of the contributors to our group to do this more. I mean, I absolutely love them. I cry when I see a hedge, one of those being cut down, because it's 200 years chopped off and on the road to nowhere. But I haven't said as much about them because we kind of don't want to do anything with them, only just side trim if necessary. So then you must follow best practice management for both of them. The elephant in the room is the amount of hedges on the farm, which is down in the back of an envelope by the average field size. There's no point in talking about hedgerow management if you have 3 fields of 100 acres each with only roadside hedges that you have no control over, maybe. And just the last point then, again, which I was reminded and pushed by the group to talk about the field margins. I tend to see them as a separate habitat, which my own colleagues know how much I love them. But I need to, obviously, they're part of the hedge, every field. I would love to have a field margin. I'm stunned how many people do not realise the money that's available for grass margins, whether they're around a hedge, or in this case in Teagasc and Athenry, where we're demonstrating the 2 metre, 4 metre, 6 metre. They don't even have to be by a hedge. But obviously, when we're talking hedges, the amount of money that's available for them per hectare. When people say €1 a metre, it doesn't sound a lot. But when you're doing it, when you're talking €2,000 a hectare, now the fencing has to come out of that, which I know is big for sheep farmers. But I mean, that fence is going to last a long time, and none of us can guarantee schemes, but I expect that measure to be there. I would argue the measure should be there forever. So anyway, grass margins, absolutely super. Absolutely not planting, no planting of wildflowers, anything like that. They will develop over time. We know that when you pull the nitrogen at the stocking rate, the ryegrass goes, and then other things come in, and even the grasses themselves after a year are super, providing seed for the birds and invertebrates and etc. So I suppose my summary then is bigger and denser is better in general. Diversity is desirable, but only healthy hedges will deliver for biodiversity and carbon. And Yvonne is going to press a button on a short video, which again, thanks to Declan McArdle for doing the videos for us.
Native hedges are incredibly important for biodiversity, as they're generally 200 years old. And in addition to the hedge plants, the ground vegetation and soil may contain a diverse range of flowering plants, grasses and invertebrates at the hedge base, in gaps and in the earth banks. There's a network of hedges in the Irish countryside with an estimated 689,000 kilometres, using a very broad definition of hedgerow, ranging from woody vegetation on earth banks to stockproof hedges. While bigger is better, diversity is desirable, but only healthy hedges have a hope of delivering for biodiversity and carbon. With that in mind, it is important not to reduce the height of tree-line hedges, creating mushroom or upside-down Toilish brush hedges, not to overflail topped hedges, reducing the amount of vegetation, particularly on the top of banks, and not to push over hedges with a digger as an improper method of hedge laying. Hedges should only be topped where there is a mass of dense, healthy growth at the base. Best practice is to cut a triangular or A-shaped profile with the peak allowed to grow as tall as possible while still cutting the growing point to prevent escaping, and allow occasional thorn trees grow up and mature. If planting new hedges, decide whether you want a topped hedge or a tree-line hedge. Both are good for biodiversity and carbon, provided they are managed correctly for each type. For new topped hedges, newly planted whips are pruned at ground level and a strip of compostable film is pushed over the cut stumps, other than occasional thorn trees which are protected with tree guards. New tree-line hedges are not pruned but allowed grow up and must never be topped. The biodiversity of tree-line hedges is primarily in the canopy, full of flowers and fruit. Topped hedges with a dense base and laid hedges provide nest sites for birds with flowers and fruit on individual trees retained. A diversity of hedges, including tree-line hedges and topped hedges, is desirable.
Okay, so well done, Catherine. Very interesting presentation. There's a number of questions in the being submitted by our viewers. A number of additional ones submitted there while the video was playing. So I suppose just a question to go back to an earlier part of your presentation. I'll just ask one question, then I'll hand over to Eddie, Catherine. But just early on as you were making your presentation, there was a question submitted from sorry, I've lost the name. But membership of the stakeholder group you mentioned. So there was a viewer interested in participating. How do they find out about joining that group?
Contact me, put it into the questions and answers, or contact Teagasc. What's the easiest way to say it? But all are absolutely welcome, yeah.
Okay, so so catherine.keena@teagasc.ie. Okay,
yes, please, maybe Yvonne could put that into the chat there as well, if you don't mind.
Okay, so Eddie, I'll hand over to you for the first couple of questions.
Thanks, Tom. Catherine, just starting off with a few management ones, really. Any tips on getting rid of briars and the ivy that are choking a white thorn hedge?
Yeah, and much in all as I love ivy, again, Maria Cullen has convinced me, and when she challenged me on it, I have seen a lot of hedges that are covered by it, but it is where the hedge is overmanaged, Eddie. I can see where the ivy is clambering over it. If the hedge is healthy and a sufficient height and width and density, I have never seen a problem. So let the hedge grow up. I love ivy, but we don't want it. It will literally cover a hedge. I do agree, and the briars. So consider how to get the hedge a bit bigger and healthier.
So am I right in thinking, Catherine, it's somewhat ironic, the question is asking how can you control it, and really the best method to control it is to leave it alone.
Well, to
leave the hedge alone.
Correct. Yeah. Because they are super, but
Yeah. And I suppose with ivy, there's also more of a comment than a question, but from a beekeeper on in the new electoral area in Wicklow, Wexford, who was saying that local authorities are allowing people to trim hedgerows at times of year that would be detrimental when hedgerows are flowering, and that they were just saying that you're doing great work in that area and creating people's awareness and contact.
But I suppose safety first always, Eddie.
I think it came to it at the end of your presentation, but there was a very detailed outline of a scenario in Donegal on high ground where they have difficulty in getting hawthorn species to grow. They're saying they can get blackthorn to grow, but they're finding it very difficult to get Irish provenance blackthorn, and they're asking, and given their experience on growing what I would say are trees, ones that you wouldn't coppice.
Now it was a farmer, it was at the Organic Open Day in Tipperary last year. A farmer came up and said for years he had been trying to grow whitethorn, coastal, right, but still similar idea, exposed. And he said when he followed my idea of pruning back, they grew. Do you know what I mean? And it just made so much sense to me that if in an exposed area, if you leave your whip grow up, it's going to get battered. Whereas if you can get it established, it may not be a very tall hedge, but you will get it growing at ground level. You have a much better chance. So whitethorns, prune, put down the compostable film or some mulch over them. I won't guarantee it, but I'd be hopeful.
Yeah. As there's a question when you're planting a hedge, very basic on that. When would you first prune a hedge?
Day one. Day one, because it goes with the way, like it just makes so much sense. I wouldn't prune without putting down the compostable film. And we've tried pruning year 4 or 5 and even year 10, and I was very disappointed with the results. The vegetation still, now maybe you need more effort. Day one, without doubt, is the best.
Yeah. A very specific one, and lots of questions coming in, and the questions moving up my screen. But sycamores, I'm trying to see where it's after disappearing. Someone wanted to remove newly germinated sycamores that have come out of seeds. Saying they are poisonous to horses grazing these fields. I wasn't aware of that.
I'm not aware of that, but at the same time, Eddie,
I came across earlier this week when a neighbour was telling me that some horses, seriously poisoned by eating sycamores.
Wow. Now, I got the fright of my life 20 years ago at the ploughing when I had my lovely normal display and somebody came in and told me they were poisonous. And I said, oh my God, what am I doing? But then I realised that most things are poisonous in a hedge. It's and they're generally not eaten. We're very conscious of you and ragwort, but a lot of things are, and they're either not eaten unless something is very hungry, or unless I'm no expert on horses now, but
There's an interesting question there from Thomas, given the time of the year, but he says he's seeing lots of berries on very old trees around his farm where he's living. And would you have anything to say about saving whitethorn seed to grow on, and how do you go about doing that, I guess, and so on?
You get a book called Our Trees, which is on the website if you Google it. It's not an easy task. I would love if we had, 100 people out doing it. It's not for everybody. It's a 2-year task. When I retire, I might try it. It's not easy, but for somebody who's interested, I would love to encourage them. Our Trees, it was a Millennium production, and it explains that.
Okay. There's another interesting question. I suppose it relates back to our own organisation, Catherine, and indeed other private consultants and advisors. The question quite simply from, sorry, it's moved on my screen now as well. Are there enough advisors around? So, there's only one Catherine Keena, and as Eddie has already said, there's a number of comments complimenting you on the great job you're doing and how you're flying the flag for improved hedgerow management, Catherine. Questions asked is, are there more advisors around the country that can advise on this?
Yeah, there are 800 FOSS advisors, and they are far more powerful than me because the farmer trusts them implicitly, whoever they're dealing with, for the most important financial advice and transfer farm advice, etc. So one word from them, even the right attitude, is more important than, if there was 10 of me, it wouldn't make any more difference. So I would see the hope I would suggest to people who are looking for hope is that in my 30 years of doing this, only in the last 2 can I see a change in attitude.
Okay.
So up to then, it was what you're doing is lovely. It was linked to schemes. Now everybody is. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but nobody questions that they could or should, or you know what I mean. I think you might understand what I'm saying, Tom.
Yes, of course. I'll just ask one more question, Eddie, that I've picked out, and then I'll hand back to you. It's about fixing this upside down toilet brush or mushroom hedge.
Yeah.
If you've made the mistake, whether it is, you went in and cut the 200-year-old hedge at the 4 or 5 feet as you described, or whether you planted a new hedge and then managed it for the first time at the 4 or 5 feet, and you're now after realizing the error of your ways. Can it be resolved or fixed?
Absolutely. Opposite. And they're the hedges we should be coppicing, not cutting down those beautiful tree line hedges, which in the past we would have talked about coppicing. And it's still okay to do it if it's done right, or, but we have so many hedges need to be brought back to ground level, and they're not doing much of a job at the moment. So we're okay, when you coppice or lay a hedge, you have a short term, loss for a longer term gain, no more than cutting forestry or whatever. But coppice those small amounts, try them out. And start with the ones where there's a stump every metre. Don't go hard on yourself. Like the picture I showed there, because planting there is a nightmare compared to doing your new hedge. So I would only coppice the ones which have already, some of the pictures I showed there where there was literally one every metre, but just at the ground, at the wrong level. So coppice, if they're young, as I said, up to 10 years, you probably need to have vegetation control. I would hope in an older one you wouldn't if it's growing vigorously. So, yeah.
Grant,
Maybe I'll hand back to you.
Catherine, a comment and a question coming in on the species that are living within a hedgerow. One comment here, I hope I understand it. It's very deceptive to appear to suggest that there's 1,400 moths, 35 butterflies, solitary bees, etc., found in hedgerows.
No, absolutely.
I'm assuming that you're talking about the huge range and diversity in types of hedgerows, and you have to look across all of those.
I don't know how many, and maybe if I knew the figure, I don't know that anybody knows how many moths are in the hedges. So I take the point that it maybe I may need to reword that a little bit better, Eddie, because I'm not saying that, no. Whereas I may have been saying it for the birds, all right, and I know all the bats use them.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I don't know that all the moths. I take that constructive criticism. Let's say
that's it.
It's a good point.
And also, on a similar note, there was interest in the number of species living in specific tree species, and that it was so high with willow and considerably lower with hawthorn or whitethorn. And
I wouldn't say considerably, and that was only one study. So it's but no, that is true. Oak and willow are way ahead on, but that's only invertebrates. Do you know what I mean? You have different. You'll have other. Again, we have to keep thinking of the full biodiversity picture. I suppose that's what I'm coming back to. But there's no doubt about it. If there's more invertebrates there, then there's more associated birds and bats and other things as well. So,
yeah.
I think it's the non-natives and the ornamentals that really shock you. Well, they don't shock you when you actually look at them because they don't be covered in. The willow is a very good example. At the end of the year, it looks very shot and grey and whatever. And I remember one farmer being very proud and saying that his willow didn't look anywhere ragged at the end of the year because it was an ornamental willow.
Yeah,
hence, that's the point, isn't it?
I'll three kind of connected questions. One from myself, and I'll hand back to Tom then. Just you mentioned that there's nearly 690,000 kilometres of hedgerows across the country. I wonder, how do we know that?
Stuart Green and colleagues, our own colleague Stuart, and the EPA through the remote sensing. In fact, I had meant to show up his map, and we have the figure for county, and he has the figure for what he calls unmanaged and managed. Now, I would call them tree line and topped. I'm not sure. No, the figures are there, Eddie. It's super.
And do we know, following on from that then, do we know how the amount of hedgerow nationally has changed over time? Have more hedgerows been removed? Like I recall doing a project many years ago looking at hedgerows when the Ordnance Survey first mapped the country in the mid-1800s, and again looking at the same area in the early 1900s, and the amount of hedgerow had increased significantly over that period in the area that I was looking at, which is in the Carlow, Wicklow, Wexford region. But do we know nationally how hedgerows have changed since the war?
I don't know. Now, Lillian works closely with Stuart, so I'd say that'll be a question for her next week. It's all there, Eddie, whether anybody's pulled it out or not. You know what I mean?
And finally, and I think it's what you're doing today, there's a question on people, I suppose, looking at grazing platforms and electric fences on big dairy farms. And is there more we can do to encourage that sector to plant hedgerows.
Yeah, that's
and
why
that's
I
what we're at, I think, I'm guessing.
average field size, we need that metric used on every farm. It's very simple that, where the corridors, I don't think I talked about the corridors, the fact that birds, bats, bees, everything goes along corridors. Now, they could be grassy margins, which is super. But so your average field size surrounded by, and average, I stress average, because again, going back to the diversity, I'm never talking about a restriction on a big field or anything like that. But average field size is huge. My own study in Waterford, the average varied from 1.2 hectares up to 33 hectares.
And
that says it all.
And the benefits there for biodiversity also tie in with my own area of work with water quality. I know we have a PhD student who did a paper many years back in the Catchments Programme showing that there was a direct relationship between field size and
I do refer to that. Yeah, hedge landscape is better. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Tom, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, I suppose, particularly given the cost of living crisis that we all hear about and the price of home heating fuels. Tim says that traditionally people harvested whitethorn hedges for domestic fuel. Any recommendations? In regard to that, Catherine, an unusual one, but I suppose that does that tie in with laying and coppicing the hedges over the winter time?
Yeah, it can do. I mean, it's usually ash people go for. I haven't heard of, but you'll find all wood. Yeah, no great comment other than it's super to use. I mean, that's what they do in France. That's their number one. Where Jack and Francois talk about that. Who has the right to get the wood out of the hedge? Is it serious or was? So maybe more so here. And the more people use them for all these different angles, the more I'd be happy.
Okay. And going back to coppicing, then again, there was a question, is it necessary to coppice, an entire length, say, of maybe 100 meters, from beginning to end, or could you coppice every fourth whitethorn on a rotation?
Yeah, I look at ideally you do 10 meters a year, but from a fencing and a practical point of view, you're probably going to do a full side of a field. But I would, if you've a doubt, I would actually do that 3 or 4. I always, even the pruning for the new hedge, I do beg every farmer that talks to me to do a meter. And I'll guarantee he'll be going back doing the rest of it the next year, if you know what I mean. So try out a little bit, but obviously then practicality comes into it if you're getting in a big machine or whatever.
Okay, yeah, that's a good recommendation actually. A trial or a pilot the first year, see how it works, and then take on the project in its entirety. Then maybe the following autumn. And maybe the final question then, and it kind of relates to that, Catherine. I guess if you are laying and coppicing, you are going to create green waste.
Yeah.
And just reading the Farmers Journal this week, it talks about that the permission is now granted again for one final year. It stresses for farmers to burn green waste, but there are alternative ways of dealing with green waste, and that's the question I want to put to you. My final question: what are the alternative ways of handling or dealing with green waste when you do undertake coppicing or indeed hedge laying?
Well, I've 2 very good ones. One is to mulch it. Now, that does cost getting a mulcher. And I mean, if it's a small amount, it may not be economical. But if you mulch it, you have, it's a valuable commodity. So that's a possibility. But if you want a zero cost method that's good for biodiversity, good for the environment, is to find a heap and leave them in it. Let them rot down naturally. They'll become a habitat as they're rotting down. We have to get away from this neatness. We have to empower people to know that it's okay to do it, because that's what people would say to me. Oh my goodness, somebody will say it's untidy. It's not. So if you have a place, and not now a valuable habitat or a bog or anywhere, but a corner of a field, if you can, a heap of wood rotting down is super for the environment and doesn't cost you anything.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. That has been a highly informative, broad presentation and question and answer session. There's many more questions on the Q&A. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get to them all, but I think we've asked the questions which provide a flavour of the overall questions posed. So thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you to my colleague Eddie as well for your help with the questions. Just to let our viewers know that next Friday, and Catherine has mentioned this, Dr. Lillian O'Sullivan, a research officer from Teagasc, will take part in the webinar, and she will talk next Friday about harnessing our hedgerows for the future. I suspect she'll be talking about storing carbon in hedgerows and so on. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I hope you have a great weekend, and thank you to Yvonne Marr for producing this morning's broadcast.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.